It is 2 hours before dawn on the Atlantic Ocean. You are on the deck of a merchant vessel, and there is something on the horizon that is moving toward you with the focused patience of something that already knows how this morning ends. It is a sloop, low and fast, and carrying too many men for a trading run. And now you can see the smoke. The warning shot skips across the water ahead of your bow, and the ocean closes over the place it entered as if nothing happened. In the language of the sea, this message requires no translation. This is the night your life changes. This is the golden age of piracy, and this is where it begins. If you enjoy our nighttime science journeys here on Earth at Night, remember to like and subscribe. We highly encourage our community to discuss the video topics in the comments and react to other comments. It is the most fun when we share our thoughts together. Now let us begin. Tonight we are going to the open ocean in the age of wooden ships and black flags. You are going to discover that the pirates of the Golden Age were governed by rules more democratic and more fair than almost any government on Earth at the time. You are going to feel what it meant to hold a heavy share of stolen treasure in your bare hands for the first time. You are going to walk through a republic on a Caribbean island that had no king and no police and no laws except the ones its own people wrote together. And you are going to meet the man who walked into battle with slow-burning fire woven into his own beard and smoke rising around his face like something that had crawled out of the dark. But first we begin exactly where this story begins. On the water, before dawn, with the sound of a sail you were never supposed to see. Chapter 1. A sail on the horizon. It is 2 hours before dawn on the Atlantic Ocean. The year is 1716. You are standing on the main deck of a merchant vessel, and the word standing does not quite describe it. You are braced. You are gripping a rope with both hands and leaning your body into the motion of the ship, because the sea tonight is not violent, but it is insistent, and it has been insistent for 9 days without pause, and your body has learned to compensate without asking permission from your mind. You do this without thinking, the way a man who has lived long enough in earthquake country learns to keep his knees loose. The deck beneath your feet is wet, not from rain but from the sea itself, which climbs the sides of the ship in sheets every time a wave rolls through and retreats, leaving the wood dark and slick. Your boots have not been truly dry in a week. Your hands are wrapped around the rope, and the rope is soaked and rough, and the combination of salt and friction has opened small, raw places on your palms that sting with the cold. The cold is the thing that surprises people who have never sailed before. The Atlantic in 1716 is grey and enormous, and it smells of salt and rotting seaweed, and something deeper underneath that has no name except ocean. The wind comes off the water in long, steady pushes that carry the cold inside your coat and find the places where your collar gaps and press against the back of your neck without apology. You have been on this ship for 11 days out of Bristol, bound for the sugar islands of the Caribbean. The cargo below is wool and ironware, and tools and bolts of plain cloth, and barrels of salted pork for the plantation stores. None of it is yours. None of it will ever be yours. You are paid a wage per voyage that will settle when the ship returns, assuming the voyage goes well and the captain does not discover reasons to reduce what is owed. You have learned not to assume. Around you, the night watch is doing what the night watch always does on the long middle passages, as little as possible. 2 men at the bow, 1 at the wheel, 1 sitting against the mainmast with his chin on his chest. The officer on watch is somewhere aft, and you can hear him walking the deck because his boots have a loose heel that taps against the wood in a rhythm you have begun to hear even in your sleep. The sky is beginning to separate from the horizon, the part of the night that sailors learn to love and also fear, because it is the part where you can start to see but cannot yet trust what you are seeing. The horizon is a suggestion, a soft, dark line below a slightly less dark sky, and between the two, a band of deep blue that is not quite either one. It is in this band of blue that you first see it, a shape. You would not call it a ship yet. It is more like a disruption in the line where the sky meets the water, a small vertical smear, a thing that does not move the way water moves. You watch it without speaking, because a man on watch learns not to say these things out loud until he is certain. The world at sea is full of tricks, floating timber, clouds that look like land, islands that appear at dawn and vanish by mid-morning. You have seen all of these. But this shape is moving, not up and down with the sea, but forward, steadily forward, with a kind of purpose that water does not have. It is moving toward you. You stand up straight. Your knuckles are tighter on the rope now. You say nothing for another 30 seconds, and then you call out to the officer quietly. He comes to the rail and squints at the horizon for a long time. Then he says something to himself that you do not catch. He walks quickly aft. Within 2 minutes, the captain is on deck. He is a careful man, not a bad captain. He raises the long brass spyglass and stands there for what feels like a very long time. When he lowers it, his face has the quality of a man who has just added up a sum and does not like the answer. The shape is a sloop, lean and low in the water and moving fast. Far too fast for a vessel carrying cargo. There are too many men visible on its deck. It is flying no flag you can identify. And it is closing the distance with the focused patience of something that already knows how this morning ends. The captain gives his orders quietly. The crew begins to move. Below deck you can hear boots hitting the boards and the controlled sound of a ship preparing for something it cannot prevent. You do not take your eyes off the horizon. The shape is a ship now, no question about it. It is moving directly toward you with the smooth, deliberate motion of a vessel that has done this before. Many times before. As the light grows, you make out details. The lean hull, the mast carrying more sail than you would expect, the crowd of figures at the bow watching your ship with the patient attention of men waiting for something they are confident is coming. Then you see the smoke, a small white puff at the front of the approaching ship, a pause that lasts just long enough for you to hold your breath. And then the sound crosses the water. A low, heavy boom you feel more in your chest than hear with your ears. The cannonball skips across the surface just ahead of your bow. Once, twice, 3 times. Small white splashes, and then gone beneath the surface, and the ocean closes over the place, as if nothing happened. In the language of the sea, this message needs no translation. Stop. Or the next one will not skip. Your captain stands still for a moment. Then he does the only thing a rational man can do. He gives the order to strike the colors, to surrender. The merchant flag comes down, and across the water at the top of the mast of that lean and purposeful sloop, a flag rises in answer. It catches the morning wind and opens fully, and you can see it clearly now in the growing light. It is black. And somewhere beneath the fear, and beneath the cold, and beneath 11 days of wet boots and raw hands, something else is rising in your chest, something you do not yet have a name for. Something that has been sitting in the dark below everything else for a very long time. You are going to have a name for it very soon. Chapter 2. The life you are running from. You do not board that ship in the next 5 minutes. It takes time for the boarding party to cross the water, time for the grappling hooks to be thrown, time for the 2 hulls to grind together. And in that time you stand on the deck of the merchant vessel and you watch them come, and you have a few minutes to think about what your life has actually been up until this exact morning. It is worth thinking about clearly. You are 23 years old. You have been at sea for 4 years. Before that, you were in Bristol, where your father was a dock worker, and his father before him was a dock worker, and the shape of a life spent moving the goods of other people from one place to another was simply the water you swam in. You did not choose the sea. The sea was what was available. Your first voyage was on a cod fishing vessel out of Plymouth, and the work was brutal, in the specific way that cold work is brutal, which is to say, it never stopped, and no individual task was beyond the ability of a man, but the accumulation of them over 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, wore something down inside you that you did not know could be worn. You were paid 31 shillings at the end of that voyage. 31 shillings for 4 months of work. You spent 8 of them on a room and a meal in Plymouth before shipping out again because there was nothing else to do. The merchant ship is better than the fishing vessel. This is the honest answer. The merchant ship is better. The work is still relentless, but it is less cold, and the wages are slightly higher, and the captain of this particular vessel is not a violent man. You have sailed under violent men. The difference between a captain who uses the cat freely and one who does not is a difference that shapes every hour of every day at sea. You understand this. You are grateful for it in the distant way that a person is grateful for the absence of pain. But the food, you need to understand the food, because the food is a kind of daily argument that the ship makes to your body about your worth and your future. Hardtack, that is the staple. A biscuit baked so hard and dry that it survives months at sea without spoiling, because nothing can grow in something so desiccated. You tap it against the barrel before eating it, because weevil larvae burrow into the soft center, and tapping the biscuit knocks them loose. You do this without disgust after the first few weeks. You do it the way you breathe. The biscuit tastes of salt and nothing else. The meat is salt beef or salt pork stored in wooden barrels of brine. It must be soaked overnight before cooking to draw out enough salt that a human being can chew it without damage. When it is cooked, it is grey and stringy, and it smells of the barrel. You eat it because the alternative is not eating. The water is kept in wooden casks, and within 2 weeks at sea it turns green. A thin film of algae coats the inside of the cask, and the water takes on a taste that sits at the back of your throat. On longer voyages, the water turns worse than green. It turns the color of the Thames at low tide and carries a smell that makes new sailors gag, and experienced sailors simply drink quickly without breathing through their nose. And then there is what the food does to your body over time. You have seen scurvy. You have seen it work on a man slowly over 3 weeks, and you understand now why the old sailors call it the silent thief. It begins with tiredness that is different from ordinary tiredness. A heaviness in the legs, a reluctance of the joints. Then the gums begin to change. They swell and darken and pull away from the teeth and begin to bleed when you press them. The teeth loosen in their sockets. Old wounds that healed years ago open again on the skin as if the body is running the damage backwards. In the final stages, a man cannot stand. His mind loses its sharpness. He becomes something less than himself, and then he becomes nothing. You have seen this happen to a man of 34 who looked 60 by the end. All of this because of the absence of one thing: fresh food, citrus, vegetables, a lime, a handful of onions. Things that cost almost nothing on land and are unavailable at sea, not because of poverty, but because no one in authority has decided that the bodies of common sailors are worth the modest cost of keeping them whole. And then there is the captain. Yours is not a violent man. This is your luck. Other men on other ships are not so lucky. The law of the sea in 1716 gives a captain authority over his crew that is essentially absolute. He can order a flogging for insubordination, and the lash he uses is a cat made of 9 knotted ropes that leaves the kind of marks on a man's back that do not fully heal. He can do this for being slow to obey, for answering back, for looking at him with an expression he does not like. There is no court of appeal on the open ocean. There is no one to complain to. The captain is the law, and the law has no mercy written into it for common sailors. And if you are unlucky enough to be in an English port when a Royal Navy press gang comes through, then the merchant ship starts to look like freedom. The Navy takes men off the streets and out of taverns by force. It is legal. It has always been legal. They press a shilling into your hand, and that makes you a sailor of the crown, and there is nothing you can do about it. The discipline on a naval vessel is harsher than anything the merchant service offers. The work is more dangerous. The pay is worse. And you will be doing it until the Navy decides you are finished or until a cannonball makes the decision for you. This is your life. This is what you are standing in the middle of when the boarding party crosses the water toward your ship this morning. And here is the thing that no one in authority ever understood about the golden age of piracy. They looked at the men who flew the black flag, and they saw criminals. They saw rogues and thieves who had chosen savagery over civilization. They wrote pamphlets about it. They gave speeches. They built gibbets in the harbor and hung bodies in iron cages as warnings to every sailor who passed. But the men crossing the water toward your ship did not choose piracy over a good life. They chose it over this. Over the wet boots and the weevil biscuits and the loosening teeth and the captain whose mood determines whether you are flogged today. They chose it over the press gang and the green water and the wages that might never come. They chose it over a future that looked exactly like this present, with no visible end and no visible change and no visible reason for any of it, except that someone somewhere needed their cargo moved, and they were the cheapest available instrument for moving it. The boarding party is almost at your rail now. One of them is holding a rope. Another carries a short sword at his side. A third is grinning at something the man beside him said. None of them are moving with the urgency of men who expect a fight. They are moving with the ease of men who have done this enough times that it no longer raises their heart rate. They do not look like monsters. They look exactly like you. They have the same salt-weathered hands, the same worn coat, the same particular tiredness behind the eyes that comes from years of watching horizons on other men's behalf. And that is the most dangerous thing about them. Chapter 3. The Floating Republic. They bring you across. That is how it happens. Not with a speech, not with a ceremony. They board your vessel, and they move through it quickly and efficiently, and they separate the crew into those who will be kept and those who will be released. And then someone asks you a question you were not expecting. Do you want to come? Not as a prisoner, not under threat, as a question, with a real answer available on both sides. You can stay on the merchant vessel if you choose. The ship will be stripped of useful cargo and then released. You will sail on to the Caribbean and eventually back to Bristol, and the cycle will continue. Or you can cross. You cross. And the first thing that happens when you reach the other side is not what you expected. What you expected was chaos. What you find instead is a man with a piece of parchment. He is the quartermaster of the vessel. He is a broad-shouldered man of about 35 with steady dark eyes and ink stains on the right side of his hand. He sits at a barrel that serves as a desk, and he does not stand when you approach him, and he does not perform authority. He simply explains. Before you sail under this flag, you will read the articles. These are the rules by which every man on this ship lives. These are the rules by which the captain himself lives. If you agree to them, you sign. If you do not agree, you say so, and we will put you ashore at the next landfall. No man sails under this flag who has not freely agreed to sail under it. He places the parchment on the barrel in front of you. You read it, and you begin to understand that you have stepped into something completely unlike anything you have ever been told exists. The articles are a contract, a real one. Not the fiction of a contract that the merchant trade offers, where a captain can add to your debt at will and subtract from your wages for reasons invented after the fact. This is a document that was written by the crew and agreed to by the crew, and which governs the crew, including the man who captains the ship. Every major decision put to a vote, every man one vote, regardless of rank. The destination of the voyage, whether to accept a prize or let it go, whether to punish a crewmate for breaking the articles. You have never voted on anything in your life. The compensation schedule is written in plain language. 2 shares for the captain, 1.5 for the quartermaster, 1 share for every common sailor, every man, no exceptions, no deductions, no wages held pending the return voyage. When a prize is taken, The plunder is divided in public on the deck in front of the whole crew, and every name is called and every share is handed over, and there is no ambiguity about any of it. You read this twice, and then you read the article about wounds. If a man loses his right arm in battle, he receives 600 pieces of 8 from the ship before the remainder of the plunder is divided. Left arm, 500. Right leg, 500. Left leg, 400. An eye, 100. A finger, 100. The amounts vary between crews and between ships, but the principle is fixed. A man who gives a piece of his body to the enterprise of this ship will be compensated from the shared treasury of the ship before any other division takes place. You have been at sea for 4 years. In those 4 years, you have known 3 men injured in the course of their work. One lost 2 fingers in a capstan accident. One fell from the rigging and broke his leg in a way that healed badly and left him with a permanent limp. One lost the sight in one eye when a line under tension snapped and caught him across the face. All 3 received the same compensation from their employers. Nothing. There was no system to compensate them. The sea was a dangerous place, and an injured man had simply been unlucky, and the cargo still needed to be delivered. You are standing on a ship crewed by outlaws in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and they have invented the world-first workers' compensation system. You keep reading. The articles prohibit fighting between crewmates on board the ship. Disputes are to be settled on shore. If 2 men have a grievance, they will be put ashore at the nearest landfall, and they will settle it with pistols or with swords, and whichever man survives will have satisfied the honor of both and may return to the ship without penalty. Violence on board is forbidden, not because violence is wrong in principle on a ship full of men who make their living through it, but because violence on board damages the hull and injures crewmates and risks fire near the powder stores, is therefore a threat to everyone. The lights-out rule. No candles or open flames below deck after 8 in the evening. Fire on a wooden ship is not a danger. Fire on a wooden ship is the end of the ship and everyone in it. This rule is enforced absolutely. No exceptions. The rule against gambling for large sums. Not gambling itself, which is tolerated and expected, but gambling that leaves men unable to function, or men so indebted to their crewmates that it creates the conditions for violence. Each rule lands like a small surprise. This is not the absence of law. This is law designed by the people who will live under it. Law built specifically to prevent every abuse that these men have already suffered under other systems. The flogging captain is impossible here because the articles remove his authority to flog. The withheld wages are impossible here because the articles make the division public and immediate. The arbitrary punishment is impossible here because the articles require a hearing before the crew. There is something else in the articles that takes a moment to fully understand: the separation of the captain from the quartermaster. On a merchant vessel, the captain holds total authority over everything. He commands in battle and in port and at sea, and in matters of discipline and in matters of navigation and in the distribution of whatever the voyage earns. One man, total power. The history of that arrangement is written on the backs of sailors across the entire Atlantic. On this ship, the captain commands in battle only. His authority during a fight is absolute because a fight requires one voice and one decision and no time for debate. But the moment the fight ends, his authority ends with it. The quartermaster governs the peace. He manages the stores. He settles the disputes. He oversees the division of plunder. He administers punishments approved by the crew. No single man can hold both powers at once. This is not a theoretical idea. This is a system built from scratch by men who had personally suffered under the alternative. You pick up the quill. The ink is dark and the parchment is soft from being rolled and unrolled many times before you, and there are already many names on it above the space where yours will go. You add your name to the list. And with that one action you have crossed from one world into another. you are no longer a merchant sailor. You are no longer a man whose labor belongs to a captain and a cargo manifest and a set of owners in Bristol who will never learn your name. You are a member of the company. 1 equal share. 1 vote. You fold the quill and set it back on the barrel. The quartermaster with the ink-stained hand looks at your name on the parchment and then looks at you and gives you the smallest possible nod of acknowledgement. Not welcome, not warmth. Something more practical than either. You have agreed to the terms. The terms protect you. The terms bind you. From this moment forward, you are one of them, in the complete sense of the word. Welcome to the Floating Republic. Chapter 4. Your new home. The sloop is not beautiful. This is the first thing you notice when you are finally standing on its deck properly and able to look at it as the thing it is rather than the shape it was on the horizon. It is not the grand tall ship of illustrations. It is low and lean and stripped of anything that does not serve the single purpose for which it was built, which is speed. The ability to catch any vessel it chooses to chase, and the ability to run from anything it cannot fight. The hull sits close to the water, lower than you are used to from merchant vessels. When a wave comes through, you feel the motion of it differently here. A merchant ship sits heavy and absorbs the ocean. This ship moves with it. It flexes and responds, and the deck tilts beneath your feet with a responsiveness that takes some adjustment. Your first few hours on board, you walk like a man, learning to walk again after an illness. 2 cannons on each side, 4 total, small by naval standards but positioned low and close to the water level, which means they can fire accurately even in moderate seas. The gun carriages are solid timber, and the ropes that secure them when not in use are thick and new. Everything about the way the guns are mounted tells you they are used regularly and maintained with care. The mast is shorter than what you are used to. The sail plan has been modified to carry more canvas at a lower height, which sacrifices elegance for the ability to maneuver in tight spaces. This ship can operate in shallow coastal waters where a Royal Navy frigate would run aground. It can anchor in coves and inlets and behind barrier islands and simply disappear from the ocean as far as any patrol is concerned. The Royal Navy hunts the open water. This ship was built to live in the places the open water cannot reach. Now you go below. You descend through a hatch, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. This is not the smell of anything individual. It is the smell of accumulated human presence in an enclosed space. 80 men have been living and sleeping and eating in this space for weeks, and the evidence of that is in the air, in a way that is total and unavoidable. Unwashed bodies, damp wool, stale rum, old food. And beneath all of it, something else. Something that rises from the very bottom of the ship below the planking beneath your feet. A sour, dark smell that has no polite name. This is the bilge. The bilge is the lowest point of the hull. It is where everything collects. Water that seeps through the hull planks. Water from rain and spray that finds its way below deck. Spillage. Waste. All of it migrates by gravity to the lowest point and sits there in a dark, permanent soup that the pumps work against constantly. The pumps never win, they only manage. Every ship that has ever sailed has this smell at its foundation, and every sailor learns to stop noticing it within a few days. You will stop noticing it, but not yet. The living quarters are a single long, low space running most of the length of the ship. The ceiling is close enough that a tall man must keep his head down. There are no walls. There are no separate rooms. No privacy of any kind exists in this space. What exists instead is a dense arrangement of hammocks hung from the beams overhead in rows so close together that a sleeping man on your left and a sleeping man on your right are close enough to touch without extending your arm. There are roughly 80 men on this vessel. You are going to learn all of their names, not because you choose to, but because proximity at this scale makes it unavoidable. You are going to know which man snores and which man talks in his sleep. You are going to know who wakes up mean and who wakes up easy. You are going to know which men can be trusted in a crisis and which ones are reliable only when conditions are favorable. You will know all of this within a few weeks, simply by occupying the same small space with them day after day in a way that has no equivalent in any life lived on land. The hammock itself is a remarkable object. It was borrowed from the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean who had been sleeping in them for generations before Europeans arrived and immediately recognized them as the most sensible solution to the problem of sleeping on a moving platform. The hammock hangs at both ends, and when the ship rolls, the hammock does not roll with it. The hammock swings gently from side to side while remaining level relative to the earth below. You sleep in a cradle rather than on a tilting floor. You sleep better in a hammock on a moving ship than you did on the hard boards of the merchant vessel. This surprises you. In fact, there are several things below this deck that surprise you when you look at them carefully. The tools stowed along the sides of the hull are clean and properly organized. The spare rope is coiled correctly. The powder kegs are sealed and stacked away from the heat of the galley. Someone on this ship takes maintenance seriously and enforces that seriousness on the rest of the crew. A badly maintained ship fails when it is needed most, and on a vessel whose life depends on being faster than everything it encounters, that kind of failure is not recoverable. This is something the outsider image of piracy never captures. The pirates of the Golden Age were not men who had abandoned discipline. They were men who had traded the discipline imposed by others for the discipline they chose to impose on themselves. The result looked chaotic from the outside and felt like freedom from the inside, but it was never careless. Careless men drowned. Careless ships sank. The articles demanded responsibility, and the responsibility was real. You find a hammock near the middle of the ship, which is the best position for sleeping because the middle swings less than the ends, and the ends are too close to the smells of both the galley forward and the bilge aft. You sit in it, and it holds you. Around you men are doing what men do in the hours between one thing and the next. Someone nearby is mending a coat with a heavy needle and coarse thread, using the tight, careful stitches of a man who has done this many times. Two men further along are playing cards on top of a barrel, using what appears to be a battered pack, missing at least 3 cards, and have improvised rules to account for this fact. Someone is sharpening a knife on a flat stone, with the long, slow rhythm of a man who does not particularly need the knife sharp at this moment, but finds the act of sharpening it to be a useful way to occupy his hands. No one is being watched. No officer is walking behind them checking that they appear occupied. No boatswain is looking for an excuse to find fault. The men work and rest and occupy themselves according to their own judgment, and they do it without resentment because they are not doing it for someone else. This ship is the enterprise of every man on it equally. Its survival is their survival. Its success is their success. You listen to the sounds of the ship settling around you, the groan of the timber as the hull flexes with the sea, the distant rhythm of the water against the outside of the hull. Somewhere above you, the snap of canvas as the wind finds the sail. You are home now. This is your home. It is loud and it smells, and there is no privacy, and the food will be grim most of the time, and you are statistically unlikely to live long. But no one is going to flog you this afternoon. And for a man who came from where you came from, that is not a small thing at all. Chapter 5. A Day in the Life. Time at sea does not work the way time works on land. On land, there are days and nights, and the natural rhythm of light and dark organizes human life into something recognizable. You wake with the light. You work through the day. You sleep in the dark. The seasons move, and the weeks move, and there is a sense that time has a shape, and you are moving through it in a direction. At sea, time is divided into watches, and the watch cycle does not care about light or dark or the natural preferences of a human body. It is a mechanical thing. 4 hours on, 4 hours off, around the clock. Every clock. The sun rises while you are on watch. The sun sets while you are off watch. Your sleep does not fall during the night. Your sleep falls whenever the rotation arrives at your name. You adjust. You adjust the way humans adjust to anything that is inescapable, which is to say not cheerfully, but completely. Within a week, your body has reorganized itself around the watch cycle, and you sleep when you are off watch, wherever you are in the rotation, and you wake when your name is called with the kind of immediate, full alertness that the sea demands. Your watch begins before dawn. You climb from your hammock in the dark and feel your way to the ladder and come up through the hatch into the air, and the air is cold and smells of salt, and the deck is wet under your boots. The watch you are relieving does not speak much. There is nothing much to say at this hour. They go below. You take your position. Your position today is at the bow. You stand at the forward edge of the ship and look at the ocean ahead of you, and there is nothing in any direction except water and sky, and the faint stars beginning to fade as the light builds on the eastern edge of the world. Your job at this moment is very simple. Watch for things. A sail on the horizon, a change in the color of the water that might indicate shallow ground, debris, birds in unusual numbers that might indicate nearby land. You watch for all of these things and you see none of them because there is nothing here. There is only the ocean and the steady forward motion of the ship and the sound of the bow cutting through the water at the hull below your feet. This is most of what sailing is. People who have not sailed believe it is the storm and the battle and the port. In terms of the hours, it is this: the standing and the watching and the waiting for something that usually does not come. At mid-morning, the work begins. The ship requires constant maintenance. Not because anything is breaking, but because the sea is always trying to break it, and the only thing standing between the ongoing attempt of the Atlantic to destroy your vessel and the vessel itself is the daily labor of the men who sail. Caulking. The seams between the deck planks open slightly with the constant flexing of the hull, and the water finds them and seeps through, and you pack them again with tarred oakum, which is old rope fiber soaked in pine tar, pressed into the gap with a caulking iron until the seam is tight. This is tedious work. It is the kind of work that requires attention, but not thought, and so you do it while the part of your mind that thinks is somewhere else. The rigging. Rope soaked in salt water becomes stiff and brittle over time, and rope that becomes brittle fails, and rope that fails at the wrong moment brings down a spar or a mast, and the ship loses its ability to move, and a ship that cannot move, already sinking by another name. You coat the working lines with tar. You inspect every knot and every join. You replace what needs replacing before it needs replacing. The guns. The cannon barrels are checked for rust. The carriages are inspected for cracks in the wood. The ropes that secure them to the deck are tested by hand. The powder charges in storage are checked for dampness. This work has a different quality from the caulking and the rigging because the guns are not defensive maintenance. They are the reason the ship exists. Tending them is not a chore. It is a preparation. You eat at midday. The food is what it is: hard bread and salt meat and water from the cask that has been at sea long enough to have opinions about it. But the meal is eaten on deck in the open air among your crewmates, and there is no officer watching you eat, and no timetable that says when you must finish, and no consequence if you sit a few minutes longer than necessary, looking at the horizon. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. In the afternoon, you climb. Lookout duty takes you up the rigging hand over hand to the small platform at the top of the mast. From this height, the ship below you becomes a narrow wooden shape in the middle of an enormous disk of water that extends in all directions to the curved edge of the world. The height is disorienting the first few times. Then it becomes simply the view from up here. You can see perhaps 15 miles in good weather. A sail at that distance is a smudge. A speck that might be spray or might be canvas, and that requires patient, focused watching to determine which. Your eyes move in slow sweeps across the horizon. Left to right, pause. Right to left, pause. any disruption in the uniform grey-blue line at the edge of visibility. You see nothing today. You spend 2 hours on the platform in the wind, and you see nothing, and you climb back down, and the muscles of your arms and shoulders remind you that you have been climbing for 3 weeks and are still building the strength for it. You will keep building it. Every day, you will be stronger for this specific life, and every day the specific life of the merchant vessel will feel more remote. The evening meal, the same as midday but occasionally supplemented by whatever fishing lines trailing from the stern have caught during the day. On a good day, this means fresh fish cooked over the galley fire, and the smell of it moving through the ship is noticeable and pleasant in a way that needs no description. On those evenings, the men gather closer together and the conversation is louder, and someone will have a pipe, and the smoke drifts away over the water, and the light is amber from the last of the sun, and the ocean around you is that particular color that exists only for the 20 minutes before full dark. In these moments, something becomes clear that was never clear to you before. These men are not here in spite of the danger. They are not here despite the hard food and the wet clothes and the constant work. They made a calculation. They weighed the life available to them against the life available here, and they chose here, not because it was safe, but because it was theirs. Every hour of it, every decision within it, every share of whatever it produced. Theirs. You begin to understand what that word actually means when it belongs to you. Theirs, yours. You go to your hammock in the early darkness. You sleep immediately. Not because this life is peaceful, but because a body that has stood watch and caulked seams and climbed a mast and stood watch again has used everything it has and requires nothing beyond the moment of lying down to release into unconsciousness. The ship moves beneath you in the dark. The ocean is enormous and indifferent, and you are asleep in a cradle suspended from the beams of a wooden ship that is your home and your livelihood and your republic and your entire world. And somewhere out there in the dark, another sail is moving. As always, Chapter 6, What You Eat and Drink. Let us be honest about the food. For the first several weeks on the sloop, it is essentially what it was on the merchant vessel. This is not surprising. All ships carry the same supplies, and the sea offers the same conditions to all of them. Hardtack, salt meat, green water, the particular dull misery of a diet that keeps a body functioning while providing it almost nothing to actually enjoy. You know this diet. Your body has adapted to this diet in the resigned way that bodies adapt to ongoing unpleasantness. You eat what is there, because what is there is what keeps you alive. But here, there are differences. The first difference is small. The rations on the sloop are distributed equally. Every man receives the same portion. On the merchant vessel, the captain ate better than the crew, and the first mate ate better than the common sailors. And the hierarchy of food was a daily visible demonstration of where each man stood in relation to every other man. Here, the quartermaster distributes from a single store, and the measure is the same for each name, and no man eats worse than the man beside him. This sounds like a small thing. After 4 years at sea, it does not feel like a small thing. The second difference is the fishing. On a merchant vessel running to schedule, there is no time to stop and no motivation to provide the crew with supplemental nutrition beyond what was loaded at port. On the sloop, there is no schedule to keep. When the lines go out, they go out properly. Heavy lines with good hooks trailing from the stern in the warm blue waters of the Caribbean approaches, and what comes back is real food. Yellowfin, dorado. Fish with flesh the color of the sunrise that you cook over the galley fire and eat while it is still hot with the grease running down your wrists. The first time you eat fresh fish on the sloop, you sit for a moment afterward without speaking and think about the hardtack on the merchant vessel and feel something that you cannot easily name. The third difference is the island stops. The sloop operates on no fixed route. When water runs low or the supply of anything essential falls to a level that concerns the quartermaster, the ship simply finds an island. Not a settled island with a harbor master and customs officials and questions about your cargo and your papers. An uninhabited island. A green line on the horizon that resolves as you approach into forest, coming down to a beach of white sand and clear water. You anchor in the shallows and go ashore. What happens on those beaches is one of the genuine pleasures of this life. The island runs wild with feral pigs and goats, descended from animals left by earlier passing ships over decades of sea traffic through these waters. You hunt them through the forest with a group of your crewmates in the early morning when the air is still cool and the birds are loud in the trees above you. The hunt is real work, but it is work in open air with sunlight coming through leaves and the smell of green growing things after weeks of salt and tar and bilge. Your legs feel the ground under them differently after so long on a moving deck. The ground does not give. It is absolute and solid, and your knees are slightly confused by this for the first half hour. When you take an animal, you bring it back to the beach and build a fire and cook it over a wooden frame in the way the old buccaneers of this coast learned from the people who were here before any European ship arrived. The word for this cooking frame in the language of the indigenous peoples of these islands is the origin of the word barbecue. You do not know this, but you are doing it. You eat fresh meat on the beach. And here there is an important creature that must be described: the sea turtle. Giant green turtles and loggerheads are found throughout these Caribbean waters in numbers that are difficult to imagine from the present day. They sleep on the surface in the warm shallows. They are enormous. A full-grown green turtle weighs as much as 3 or 4 men and moves through the water with the calm authority of something that has been doing this for a very long time. On the surface, they are slow and easy to approach by a small boat, and once flipped onto their backs, they cannot right themselves. A single large sea turtle can feed the entire crew of your ship. This is not a metaphor, it is a logistical fact. And more usefully, for a ship with no refrigeration, a living turtle kept on its back, on the deck, stays alive for weeks. You do not need to preserve the meat. You simply keep the animal alive until the meat is needed, and then you do not need to keep it anymore. You keep 2 of them on deck for most of a month. They make a sound when they are disturbed, a deep, slow exhalation that is not quite a groan but occupies the same emotional register. The men name them. They are named after 2 members of the crew. The turtles are judged to resemble, and this judgment is accepted without serious objection by the men in question. The turtles become a feature of daily life on the deck. You walk around them in the mornings. They watch the ocean with their ancient, patient eyes. They are treated with reasonable courtesy up until the evening they become dinner. The crew eats well for 2 days from a single animal, and the shells are kept for a while because there is a superstition among some of the older sailors about throwing the shell of a named turtle overboard before the moon has set on the promise. Day it was eaten. You do not know where this superstition comes from. You observe it anyway. And then there is the prize. When a merchant vessel is taken, the first place the boarding party goes after the weapons is the larder of the captain. A merchant captain eats well. He carries wine in proper barrels. White flour for bread rather than the black flour that produces the hardtack. Casks of sugar, dried fruit, preserved vegetables. Sometimes a cage of live chickens on deck. Occasionally a small pig. That evening the sloop becomes something it is not on ordinary days. The fire in the galley is larger. The smell of fresh bread baking reaches even the aft end of the ship. Wine comes out in tin cups, and the rough edge it usually carries is smoothed by the fact that tonight it accompanies something other than salt meat. Someone produces an instrument, a tin whistle, a drum made from a barrel end. The music is not sophisticated, but it is loud and it is in time and it carries across the water in the dark. You eat until you are genuinely full, not the functional fullness of having consumed enough calories, the deeper fullness of having actually enjoyed a meal, of having sat with other people around real food and eaten it slowly and tasted it. This is what the Golden Age actually is, in its most honest and most human moment. Not the battle, and not the flag, and not the share of the plunder sitting heavy in your hands. It is this: warm food and music and the smell of something good cooking, and the sound of men who chose this life together laughing in the dark above the water. A short life, but a merry one. You understand that phrase now in a way you did not before. It is not a boast, it is not bravado, it is a philosophy. A genuine reckoning with the terms available and a decision about which terms to accept. The terms you chose give you this evening. The terms you left behind would never have given you this evening. You drink the stolen wine. It tastes like the right decision. Chapter 7. The Psychology of the Black Flag. The attack does not begin when the cannon fires. It begins much earlier than that. It begins before you are even visible on the horizon to the vessel you are hunting. It begins with a calculation that the captain makes in the grey morning light with the spyglass raised and his eyes moving across a distant shape that does not yet know it is a target. He is not calculating firepower. He is not calculating the number of men on the enemy deck or the thickness of the enemy hull or the range of the enemy guns. He is calculating something more fundamental. He is calculating the precise moment at which fear becomes his most effective weapon, and he has been calculating this for years. This is the part of piracy that does not survive into legend as clearly as the swords and the cannons. The golden age of piracy was not sustained primarily by violence. It was sustained by the management of information, by the careful and deliberate construction of a reputation so formidable that violence became in most cases unnecessary. The hunt begins with deception. Your sloop approaches the distant vessel flying a flag. Not a black flag, an English flag, or a French flag, or no flag at all, depending on what the captain judges will produce the least alarm at the greatest distance. The goal is to close the distance without triggering a response. A merchant vessel that knows it is being pursued will run. Your ship is faster, but the ocean is large, and a head start of several hours in bad weather can create complications. The ideal approach ends with the prey vessel unable to choose anything except the choices you have already prepared for it. As you close the distance, the captain watches the other ship for signals, the angle of the hull, whether extra sail is being set, whether figures can be seen moving with urgency on the deck. He reads all of these things and adjusts his approach accordingly. When the moment is right, he gives the order. The false flag comes down. The mast stands bare. In the language of the sea, a ship flying no flag is a ship that has not yet declared its intentions, and that pause of bare mast is itself a message. It is a held breath, a moment of suspended information that communicates uncertainty, and uncertainty produces in a merchant captain a particular focused quality of dread. Then the black flag rises. It catches the wind and opens. There are as many variations of the black flag as there are captains who flew one, and each variation is a slightly different message encoded in a common language: the skull and crossbones. The hourglass in the hand of a skeleton with the sand running out. A skeleton raising a toast to the devil. A bleeding heart. A sword. A spear. The colors are black and white and occasionally red, and every combination means something different, and every merchant sailor who has spent time on these waters knows what it means. The red flag is the most feared of all. A red flag means no quarter, no mercy, no prisoners, no surrender accepted. The red flag means that the ship flying it has decided that this encounter ends in one way only, and the only variable is how quickly. Most pirate captains flew the black flag specifically to avoid the situation the red flag created. The black flag was an offer: surrender now, and no one dies. The red flag removed the offer entirely. Walk through the flags of the specific captains whose names history preserved. Calico Jack Rackham flew a skull above two crossed swords. It was simple and clear and immediately recognizable. The skull meant death. The crossed swords meant it would be delivered with skill. Edward Lowe flew a red and white skeleton on a field of black. Charles Vane flew a flag that showed an adversarial figure brandishing a weapon in a way that left nothing open to interpretation. Bartholomew Roberts flew 3 different flags depending on the circumstances of the approach. One for general use, one specifically for vessels from Martinique, one for vessels from Barbados. Roberts had a personal grievance with the governors of those islands, and the specific flags were his way of announcing the grievance on the horizon before a single word was spoken between ships. Roberts was the most successful pirate of the entire Golden Age by the number of prizes taken. He understood the flag as communication better than almost anyone. And then there is Edward Teach. Blackbeard flew a skeleton figure standing upright, holding an hourglass in one hand and a spear aimed at a bleeding heart in the other. The figure raised a toast to the devil with the spear hand. The message was layered with meaning the way a threat delivered quietly in a crowded room carries more weight than a threat shouted across the street. Your time is running out. I am comfortable with death. Yours will not be quick. I am on intimate terms with the devil, and this does not trouble me. The flag was designed, and it was designed deliberately by a man who understood that the flag was a weapon and that a weapon functions best when you do not have to use it. Here is the mathematics of the situation. A pirate attack that ends in a prolonged battle is a failed attack. A battle damages your ship. It tears your sails and breaks your rigging and cracks your masts and splinters your hull. It kills and wounds your crewmates. It consumes your powder and shot. And it produces exactly the same prize as an attack that ends without a fight. The goods in the hold do not change based on how difficult it was to acquire them. The share each man receives is the same, whether the prize was taken at the cost of 3 dead crewmates or at the cost of a single warning shot and a raised black flag. The flag was therefore an investment in the most practical sense of the word. Every ship that surrendered at the sight of it cost nothing. Every ship that surrendered at the sight of it preserved the powder and the men and the rigging for the next encounter. And every ship that surrendered at the sight of it added one more story to the reputation. One more captain arriving in port with a tale of the black flag rising above the approaching sloop. One more addition to the accumulating legend that made the next encounter slightly more likely to end without blood and without cost. A single act of well-publicized ruthlessness could be worth a dozen surrendered prizes by making every subsequent prize easier to take. The captains of the Golden Age understood this. Some of them staged acts of violence specifically because a witnessed cruelty would travel faster and further than a routine capture. The story of what had been done to the crew of one specific ship moved through the harbors and the taverns and the captains who gathered in the ports, and it arrived at the next potential prize weeks before the black flag did. This is the part of the Golden Age that requires honesty. The flag was a system of rational calculation, and that system sometimes required real violence to sustain the reputation that made it effective. The captains who built the most formidable names knew this and acted on it, and the history carries the weight of that alongside everything else. The most valuable thing a pirate captain of the Golden Age possessed was not his ship, it was not his cannons. It was not the goods in his hold or the gold in his purse. It was his name. His name preceded him across the ocean by weeks and months, carried in the mouths of released prisoners and frightened merchant captains and harbor gossips. His name arrived in ports before his ship did, and did the work of his flag before his flag was even visible. A crew that heard the name and recognized it and had heard the stories attached to it was already half surrendered before the first sail appeared on the horizon. You sail under one of those names now. You have begun to understand what it costs to build a name like that. And you have begun to understand what it feels like to benefit from one. Chapter 8. Fire, Smoke, and Boarding. The day the flag does not work, you will know it immediately. The merchant vessel does not heave to. It does not strike its colors. Instead, it begins to turn. The hull swings away from you, and the crew on its deck is moving with the frantic, purposeful energy of people who have decided that running is better than surrendering, and that they would rather test the speed of their vessel against yours than accept what the black flag is offering. They are wrong about the speed, but they do not know that yet. Your captain gives the order to close. The sloop accelerates. The distance between the two ships is not shrinking quickly, but it is shrinking, and it will keep shrinking. And the merchant captain knows this and keeps running anyway, because the alternative is to stop and face what is behind him. Your captain gives a second order. The gun crews take their positions. You have watched these men run their drills for weeks now. The gun crew of a sloop in 1716 operates as a unit so practiced it appears to function as a single organism. The powder boy runs the cartridge from the magazine below. The loader rams it home. The shot follows. The touch hole is primed. The gunner sights along the barrel and makes adjustments for the motion of both ships and the wind and the distance and the angle of the waves beneath the hull. All of this in under 2 minutes. A trained naval gun crew on a Royal Navy frigate can do it faster, but for the purposes of what is about to happen, 2 minutes is sufficient. The captain orders a single shot across the bow. The cannon fires. The sound is not like the sound of a gun, it is larger than that. It is a physical pressure that starts in your chest and moves outward through your entire body in a wave, and the smoke is immediate and total and white, and the smell of sulfur hits the back of your throat before the sound has finished, moving through you. The ball skips across the water ahead of the merchant vessel and raises a line of white splashes. The merchant vessel does not stop. Your captain gives the order for a broadside. This is the moment the drill becomes real. The gun crews move with complete focus. No one is shouting. No one is wasting energy on anything that is not the specific task directly in front of them. Chain shot is loaded in 2 of the guns. Chain shot is 2 iron balls connected by a length of chain, and when it fires, the chain spins through the air in a blur, and when it reaches the rigging of the target vessel, it does not punch through the way a solid ball does. It tears, it rips, it shreds rope and canvas and wood in a long, catastrophic diagonal path through everything it encounters. The goal is not to sink the merchant vessel. The goal is to make it unable to run. You come alongside, not directly, at an angle that allows your guns to bear on the enemy deck, while minimizing the angle at which their guns can return fire. The geometry of this approach has a name in naval tactics. You do not know the name. You know the shape of it, because you have watched the captain position the ship this way in the drills, and you have begun to understand what he is doing and why. The broadside fires, all 4 guns at once. The sound is absolute. It is not 4 individual sounds. It is one sound that contains all 4 sounds, and the sound arrives at the same moment. The deck lurches under your feet from the recoil, and the smoke rises from all 4 gun ports simultaneously, and for 3 or 4 seconds you are inside. A white wall of it, with the taste of sulfur on your tongue and the ringing starting in your ears that will last for hours, and the smell of something burning that is the powder residue on the guns. Then the smoke begins to clear. The merchant vessel has lost its main mast. The spar is cracked, and the sail is hanging half over the side, dragging in the water, creating drag that pulls the ship sideways. The rigging is destroyed along one side. The vessel is not sinking. It is simply stopped. A ship without a mast is a ship that has nowhere to go. The colors come down. They come down quickly and without hesitation, and the sight of them coming down changes something in the air aboard your ship. The tension does not disappear, but it transforms. The focus required by the approach and the firing has nowhere left to go, and it becomes something looser, something that moves through the crew in a wave. Someone near you lets out a long breath. The grappling hooks go out. 3 of them, heavy iron claws on the end of ropes that arc through the air and catch on the rail of the merchant vessel with a sound like a creak of protest. The ropes come taut. The crews on both sides haul. The two hulls close on each other slowly, and then the gap narrows to nothing, and the two vessels grind together with a sound of timber on timber that you feel more than hear through the soles of your boots. The boarding party goes over. You are in it. The rail is the crossing point, and you go over it with a pistol in one hand and a cutlass in the other, and the merchant deck is below you and then under you, and then you are on it. The smell on this deck is different from yours. Fresh wood and tar and the particular staleness of a closed hold recently opened. There is a smear of dark something on the deck near the base of the damaged mast that you do not look at too closely. The merchant crew is assembled amidships. Most of them are standing with their hands visible and their faces showing the particular expression of men who have done the calculation and found that the number they have arrived at gives them no alternative. A few of them are sitting down. One older man near the stern is staring at a fixed point in the middle distance with the focused calm of someone who has decided that the best available option is to be somewhere else in his mind until this is finished. No one is fighting. There is a capture. There is the boarding party moving through the ship in pairs, checking below deck for hidden men and concealed weapons. There is the quartermaster arriving within minutes with the inventory list and beginning the systematic accounting of everything the vessel contains. Everything is written down. The merchant crew watches this in silence. You stand on their deck in the smoke and the quiet that follows violence when the violence was actually avoided, and you understand something about the flag that you could not have understood before today. The flag was never primarily about fighting. The fight was always the failure state. The flag was about making the fight so obviously pointless that a rational man would choose not to have it. Most of them did. Most of them always did. The few who did not ended up like this ship. Still floating, still intact, having cost everyone several hours and a quantity of powder and a mast that will need replacing. You look at the man near the stern who was staring at the fixed point in the distance. He is still staring at it. Whatever is at that fixed point has not moved while all of this has been happening around him. He is perhaps 40 years old. He has the hands of a man who has been at sea for a long time. He is wearing a coat that was good once. He looks, in other words, exactly like you looked 8 weeks ago. The same hands, the same coat, worn past the point where it was worth keeping. The same particular emptiness behind the eyes of a man who has been somewhere he did not choose to be for longer than he intended. The smoke drifts away across the water. The ocean is very quiet after the guns. Chapter 9. The Count. The division of plunder is not a casual event. It is a ceremony. It is the moment the entire enterprise of the ship resolves into something concrete and countable and real. It is the moment the articles become not just a document you signed, but a system that delivers on what it promised. Everything else aboard the sloop exists to make this moment possible. The flag and the reputation and the drills and the weeks of salt water and watch cycles and weevil biscuits. All of it moves toward this. The captured goods are brought up from the hold of the prize vessel and assembled on the deck of your sloop. This process takes hours. It is methodical and it is public. Nothing disappears below deck before it has been seen and counted and written in the inventory. Nothing is set aside. Nothing is handled without the quartermaster or one of his designated witnesses being present to observe. The entire crew knows what has been taken because the entire crew is watching it be taken. This is the most important part. The transparency is not a courtesy. It is not the captain being generous with information. It is the structural requirement of a system that functions only as long as every man believes the count will be honest. 80 men on a wooden ship in the middle of the ocean have no external authority to appeal to. There is no magistrate. There is no court. There is no one to complain to except each other. The articles work because the men who sail under them have agreed to enforce them, and the men agree to enforce them because they believe the articles will protect them. Remove the honest count, and the whole structure fails, because the whole structure rests on the honest count. Now let us look at what the count actually contains. The popular idea of pirate plunder is gold coins, chests of them, heavy and yellow, and stacked to the lid. This is almost entirely a fiction. The real treasure of a merchant vessel is its cargo, and the cargo of a merchant vessel in 1716 is practical goods. Barrels of sugar from the Caribbean plantations, bolts of indigo-dyed cloth, tobacco, sacks of rice or grain, barrels of molasses, casks of wine. These things have real value. Sugar and tobacco and indigo are worth serious money in the markets of London and Amsterdam, and they can be sold in any port where a merchant is willing to ask fewer questions than a customs official would. The volume of goods from a single well-loaded merchant vessel is enough to keep a sloop crew fed and funded for months. One prize at the right moment can change the entire trajectory of a voyage. This is why the hunt was so methodical and why the captain invested so heavily in his reputation. A single large prize taken cleanly by means of the flag alone was worth more than 3 prizes taken through costly battle. Beyond the cargo, there is the ship itself. The cannons are valuable. A bronze cannon represents a significant investment, and there are buyers for bronze cannons who do not require documentation of origin. The anchor chain, the spare rope, the sails, the tools, the navigational instruments, the medical supplies in the surgeon chest. All of it is inventoried. All of it has a value, and the value is written down beside the name of the object in the quartermaster ledger with the same flat precision that a merchant company clerk applies to a warehouse inventory. The pirate economy ran on the same arithmetic as any other economy. The arithmetic simply began with a different kind of acquisition. And then there are the personal belongings of the crew. This is where the ordinary human texture of the prize becomes visible. A merchant captain carries money, not much by the standards of the men who own his ship, but more than the common sailor. He carries silver buckles on his shoes, a good coat, a watch perhaps, personal documents. The officers carry similar things at smaller scale. The common sailors carry almost nothing, and the articles in most cases instruct the boarding party to leave the common sailors of a captured vessel with their personal possessions, because these men are not the enemy and their few coins, the portrait of a wife or a child folded in a pocket, are worth more to them than they are to anyone else. This is written into the code of most crews. You do not take a poor man his last few shillings. The inventory is complete. The full crew assembles on deck. The wounded come first. This is not a formality. This is the operating principle of the compensation system, and it applies before anything else moves. A man who lost the use of his right hand in the boarding receives his payment from the shared treasury now before any personal shares are calculated. The articles specify the amounts, and the amounts are known to every man on the ship. The payment is made publicly. The man receives it publicly. The crew witnesses it publicly. This moment is not bureaucratic. It is the moment the articles prove they mean what they say about the people who sail under them. Then, the division. Shares are calculated against the total value of the inventory. The captain receives 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5. Every common sailor 1 full share. The names are called in order. Each man comes forward. Each man receives his portion in full in front of the assembled crew. You come forward when your name is called. The quartermaster places your share in your hands. It is heavier than you expected, not because the prize was exceptionally valuable, simply because you have never held this much at once before. A merchant sailor of your experience would earn this amount in approximately 2 years of continuous service, assuming the captain paid in full what was owed, which was not guaranteed. You earned it in 6 weeks. You stand there for a moment with the weight of it in your hands, and you feel several things at once. Satisfaction, a recognition that the system worked exactly as the articles described. A faint unreality about the speed of it relative to any other way you have ever earned anything. Look at the men around you. The man to your left is a former naval sailor who was pressed into service at 17 and who has been at sea for 14 years in one form or another. He receives his share with the expression of a man checking a sum he has been waiting to verify. To your right is a younger man from Barbados who was a plantation laborer 2 years ago and who cannot read the articles but had them read to him, and who holds his share now with both hands and looks at it steadily for a long time before putting it away. Every man here came from a different starting point. Every man here received the same share. This is the thing the men in the colonial ports and the admiralty offices and the newspaper pamphlets could never quite bring themselves to describe accurately when they wrote about piracy. They called it theft. They called it lawlessness. They built gibbets and gave speeches. But they did not describe the moment of the division, because the moment of the division was the clearest argument available that the men under the black flag had built something that worked on their own terms and by their own principles, and that the thing it most resembled was justice. You close your hands around it. You walk back to your position in the assembled crew, and you stand there for a moment more before moving. The ceremony is complete, and the ship is already beginning to move back to its purpose, and the ocean ahead is the same ocean it always is. But something has settled in you that was not settled before. The articles said this would happen. You signed a document that promised this moment, and the moment arrived, and it was exactly what the document said it would be. You have lived under many systems in your life. Every one of them was built by someone else or for someone else. This one was built by the people living under it, for the people living under it. The ship begins to move again toward wherever it is going next. The ocean receives you without comment. Chapter 10. Nassau, the Pirate Republic. The island appears on the horizon, the way all islands appear from the sea. As a low green smudge at first, then as something with definition. Trees, a beach line, the shape of a harbor. And then as you come in closer through the clear, shallow water of the Bahamian coast, you begin to see the settlement itself. And the settlement does not look like anything you have a category for. It is not a town. It has the bones of a town, but something has grown over those bones that is not quite what anyone with civic intentions would have planned. Wooden buildings along the beach. Canvas shelters filling the spaces between them. Cooking fires. Hammocks slung between trees in the tree line beyond the sand. Sloops anchored in the harbor in numbers you did not expect. More than a dozen, perhaps 20. Each with its own character, each representing a separate crew, a separate captain, a separate story. This is Nassau in the Bahamas in the year 1716. This is the capital of a republic that has no official name and no government and no flag of its own, and more than 1,000 inhabitants who would be hanged in any English colonial port if someone bothered to arrest them. No one is bothering to arrest them here because there is no one here with the authority or the will to do it. The previous colonial governor of the Bahamas abandoned Nassau years ago when it became clear that maintaining a government presence here required resources that London was not prepared to allocate to a minor island chain in the Caribbean. The few colonists who remained made their peace with the situation, because the practical matter was that 1,000 armed men were going to be here, whether they approved or not, and it was considerably better to have a working relationship with them than to spend every day in opposition to something you could not change. There is a rough order to the place. The different crews observe each other with the professional courtesy of men who share a business and who understand that open conflict between them would benefit no one. Disputes between crews are settled through negotiation or occasionally by challenge, but rarely by the kind of wholesale violence that the outside world imagined when it pictured a harbor full of pirates. The articles that govern each individual ship extend their logic outward into the settlement. Men who have agreed to resolve their differences according to a code on the water tend to apply something similar on shore. You come ashore in the late afternoon. The beach is wide and white, and the sand is warm under your boots, and the smell of the place hits you before you are fully out of the boat. Roasting meat, wood smoke, rum. The particular layered smell of a settlement that has grown faster than any sanitation consideration could account for. It is not a clean smell, but it is a living smell. And after weeks at sea where every smell is salt and tar, and the breath of other men in a hammock close enough to touch it, is overwhelming in a way that is somehow not unpleasant. The taverns are the center of everything. There are perhaps 8 of them along the beach, and they are not elegant establishments. They are wooden structures with canvas roofs and open sides and long plank tables and a barrel of rum for which the price is variable depending on how recently a prize came in. When a ship returns with plunder, the rum is cheap and the tables are full, and the noise carries down the beach and across the water to the anchored sloops, and the men on watch on those sloops can hear it and know that tonight they are missing something. You find a seat at a table and someone puts a cup in front of you. The rum is rough and it is sweet and it is cold from the cask, and it is the first drink you have had in 6 weeks that was not rationed, and that no one is going to count and write beside your name in a ledger. You drink it and you feel it move through you with the speed that alcohol moves through a body that has not encountered it in some time. Around you, the people of Nassau are doing what the people of Nassau do: gambling. The dice games are constant, and they are played with the intensity of men who genuinely do not know if they will be alive next month, and who have therefore arrived at the rational conclusion that holding money in reserve for a future that may not come is a kind of delusion. A man you have seen perform with quiet competence in the rigging, under pressure, is now losing money at a pace that suggests the dice are not his friend, and that this has been the pattern for some time, and that this information has not changed his behavior. He will lose everything he earned over the last 6 weeks by tomorrow evening, and he will sail out again next week and earn more and come back, and the dice will be waiting. The pirate philosophy, in its most honest form, is a philosophy of the present tense. The future is uncertain. The future has always been uncertain for men who live like this. The man with the dice is not being irrational by the logic of his own life. He is being fully rational. He has money now. Now is the only tense he trusts. This is what a short life merry actually means when you get close enough to see it clearly. It is not bravado. It is a genuine philosophical position arrived at through experience. The men who say it have thought about it, and they have concluded that it is true, and they are living inside that conclusion as completely as they know how. The settlement is not just chaos, though the surface of it can look that way. Nassau has an economy, a real one. Merchants who officially condemn piracy in the ports of Barbados and Jamaica quietly send agents to Nassau to buy stolen goods at fractions of their market value. A barrel of sugar taken from a captured merchant vessel and sold in Nassau for a quarter of its London price is still profitable for the buyer, because the buyer paid nothing for the labor that produced it, and nothing for the ship that carried it, and nothing for the risk that took it. The merchant in the clean coat makes money. The pirate with the rough hands makes money. Everyone in the transaction is doing something they would prefer not to have described in public. And there are others, gunsmiths who repair weapons and ask no questions about the circumstances of their damage, chandlers who sell rope and canvas and nails for ship repair, a man who operates as an informal banker, exchanging the goods taken as plunder for coin at rates that favor him but that are more convenient than carrying barrels of sugar to a legitimate market, tavern keepers and provisioners, and all the ordinary commerce of a working settlement. The Black Flag was not sustained by violence alone. It was sustained by commerce, by the willingness of people with cleaner hands and cleaner reputations to do business in the dark with men they would not acknowledge in the light. Nassau was the visible surface of a system that extended in both directions into the most respectable layers of Atlantic trade. You drink your rum and watch the harbor fill with the last light of the afternoon. This republic will not last. You do not know this yet. You have no way of knowing it. You are sitting in the tavern, and the rum is working, and the fire is warm, and somewhere behind you, someone is playing a tin whistle, badly but with great confidence, and the ocean is there at the edge of everything, as it always is. The republic will not last, but tonight it is real, and tonight you are in it, and tonight it is enough. Chapter 11. The Surgeon and the Price of Violence. At some point during your time on the sloop, a man gets hurt. Not in a battle. In the ordinary course of the work that sailing requires, a line under tension lets go at the wrong moment. A man working the capstan loses his grip when the ship rolls and the handle catches him across the forearm with a crack that carries across the deck and does not need to be interpreted. He sits down immediately. He holds his arm against his chest. His face goes the color of old canvas. The carpenter comes. On most pirate ships of the Golden Age, there is no trained surgeon. The closest thing to medical authority on board is the ship carpenter, and the reason for this is a practical one that does not become any less grim for being practical. The most common major medical procedure performed on a sailing vessel is amputation. Amputation requires a good saw applied quickly and with confidence by someone who understands the structure of the thing being removed. No one on a wooden ship understands structure better than the man whose job it is to maintain it. You watch the carpenter examine the arm. He does it with his hands, running his fingers along the bone with a focused pressure that makes the injured man exhale sharply through his teeth. The carpenter says something. The quartermaster comes. There is a brief discussion. The arm is broken, but it is broken cleanly, and the carpenter is reasonably confident that with proper splinting and rest, it will heal. He has seen broken arms heal at sea before. He has also seen them not heal and has learned to tell the difference by the way the bone sits under the skin. The arm is splinted with strips of wood and bound with cloth. The man is helped to his hammock. He will be off watch for 3 weeks. He will spend those 3 weeks in the hammock below deck, listening to the ship and feeling every motion of it differently, now that he cannot brace himself against it with both arms. His crewmates will bring him food and water, not because it is their job and not because anyone has ordered them to, but because this is how the ship functions. A crew that abandons its injured members is a crew that every man knows will eventually abandon him, and so no one abandons anyone. But let us be honest about what medicine looks like at sea in 1716. The surgeon chest exists on better equipped vessels. It is a wooden box containing tools and substances that represent the full extent of what the medical understanding of this era can offer to a body in crisis. There is laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol and which is the most effective pain relief available, which is to say it is imperfect, but it is real. There are probes and forceps for extracting shot and splinters from wounds. There are needles and heavy thread for closing cuts. There is mercury for the treatment of certain diseases that sailors acquire in port, and that the mercury treats with limited effectiveness at the cost of significant additional suffering from the mercury itself. There are dried herbs and powders of varied and sometimes invented utility. What there is not is any understanding of why wounds become infected. This is the fundamental medical crisis of the sailing age. A sword cut that is clean when it is made becomes dangerous, not from the sword, but from what enters the wound afterward. The invisible world of bacteria and infection is completely unknown to every person alive in 1716, including the most educated physicians in London and Paris. Men apply whatever they have to wounds. They pack them with cloth. They pour rum into them because rum is available and smells like something that should work. They apply poultices made from substances that smell medicinal. None of these things address the actual mechanism of infection, and some of them make it considerably worse. A man who survives a battle wound in 1716 survives largely because his own immune system is strong enough to manage the invasion without assistance. Medical treatment of the period offers real support in some cases, and additional harm in others, and the practitioner rarely knows which outcome is coming until it is already arrived. The diseases of the port are a separate category entirely. Any ship that puts into a busy harbor carries men ashore who carry money and who are looking for the specific pleasures that ports have always provided. The diseases they encounter are treated with mercury, and the mercury is administered internally at doses that in the long run cause damage that rivals the disease. Men lose their teeth and their hair and the feeling in their extremities from mercury treatment. Some survive the disease only to be destroyed by the cure over the following years. The surgeon chest contains mercury as a standard item, and its presence there is both a comfort and a slow catastrophe for the men who require it. Cauterization is the standard response to a serious wound that is bleeding dangerously. You do not need to know what this looks like to understand what it is. An iron is heated until it is red. The red iron is applied directly to the wound to seal it. The heat destroys the tissue it contacts, and in destroying it, stops the bleeding from the vessels within that tissue. The procedure works. It also causes additional injury to the body. It is meant to help, and the pain of it is substantial enough that the patient is given as much laudanum as is available and held down by his crewmates regardless. And the sound of the procedure carries through the ship. Men recover from this. Men also die from it. The survival rate from any serious shipboard surgery in the Golden Age is not encouraging when you look at it in raw numbers. A man who loses a limb has perhaps a 1 in 2 chance of surviving the next 3 weeks. Infection will come regardless of the surgery. The question is whether his body is strong enough to fight it. Some are, and some are not, and the carpenter cannot determine in advance which man falls into which category. Now return to the articles. A man who loses his right arm receives 600 pieces of 8 from the ship before the plunder is divided. The articles make this guarantee real and immediate, and witnessed by the entire crew. And in a world where a common sailor injured in merchant service received nothing and no one, and was simply deposited at the nearest port and left to manage his disability on his own, this guarantee meant something that cannot be calculated. In terms of the 600 pieces of 8 themselves, it meant that the company had thought about what it was asking before asking it. It meant that the company acknowledged in writing the human cost of the enterprise. It meant that when a man looked down at the stump where his arm used to be, he was not also looking at a future of empty hands and empty pockets. He was looking at a payment that had already been agreed to by every man whose name was on the articles. The guarantee was not charity. It was a contract, and the contract had been signed by the full crew at the beginning and could not be undone because the vote that made the articles was the same vote that would be required to unmake them, and no crew ever voted to reduce. The compensation for wounds, because every man on the ship understood that the next man compensated under that article might be him. This is not a small thing to build into a code of conduct. In many ways, it is the heart of what the articles actually meant, not the share system or the voting rights or the lights-out rule. The wounded first, before the division. Before the captain, and before the quartermaster, and before the newest man who signed yesterday, the wounded first. That one phrase contains the entire philosophy of the Floating Republic. Chapter 12. Reading the Sea. You are somewhere in the Atlantic. You know this with certainty. The certainty ends there. How far you are from the nearest land is a question that the navigator answers with a method called dead reckoning. And dead reckoning is exactly as reliable as the word reckoning suggests, which is to say, it is an educated attempt to arrive at a number that a man of skill and experience can make work tolerably well under most conditions, and that under bad conditions can go catastrophically wrong. Here is how it works. You start from a known position, a port you left, a landmark you passed, a fixed point in space you can verify. From that point, you track your speed using a device called the chip log. It is a flat piece of weighted wood attached to a rope knotted at regular intervals. You throw the wood off the stern, and you count how many knots pass through your hands in a fixed unit of time as the ship moves forward. The number of knots tells you how fast you are moving, and the word knot as a unit of speed comes from this tool directly. You record the speed, you record the direction from the compass, you record the time. You calculate where those factors should have taken you from your last known point. The problem is that the ocean does not stay still while you are calculating. Currents move through the ocean like rivers move through land, except that you cannot see them and you cannot feel them from the deck of the ship, and they do not announce themselves. The Gulf Stream moves warm water northward along the coast of North America at speeds that can push your ship miles off its calculated course in a single night without any indication that this is happening. Storms drive you sideways. Wind shifts push you off your planned heading. Each small deviation is not large. But small deviations that compound over days and weeks become large deviations, and a navigator who began with a true position can find himself looking at a coastline that should not be where his calculations say it is. This is the great unsolvable mystery of the Golden Age. Latitude you can determine. The angle of the sun above the horizon at noon, measured with a quadrant or an astrolabe, gives you your distance from the equator. This works. This has been working for centuries, and it works reliably as long as the sky is clear enough to see the sun. You know how far north or south you are. What you cannot determine is longitude, how far east or west. There is no instrument in 1716 that can tell you this. The problem is fundamentally about time. To know your longitude, you need to know what time it is at a fixed reference point far away. The Earth rotates, and the position of the sun in the sky changes as it rotates. And if you knew what time it was at your home port, you could compare that to what time your sun says it is, where you are standing, and calculate the difference. In longitude, from the difference in time, but there is no clock in existence that keeps accurate time on a moving ship in changing temperatures and humidity for the months a voyage requires. The best clocks of the era gain or lose minutes per day at sea, and minutes per day become hours per week, and hours per week become positional errors of hundreds of miles. John Harrison will eventually solve this problem. The solution will take him decades and multiple chronometers of increasing precision and a dispute with an establishment that does not want to believe that a clockmaker from Yorkshire has done what the finest mathematical minds of the age said could not be done. But Harrison is not yet born in the years we are describing. His solution is decades in the future. For the sailors of the Golden Age, there is only dead reckoning and the skill of the navigator and the willingness to hold uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. Your navigator holds uncertainty the way a skilled card player holds a weak hand, with composure, with the understanding that uncertainty is the condition of the game and that the man who manages it best will do better than the man who refuses to accept it. Your navigator is a man who was born in Bermuda and learned to read the ocean from a father who learned it from his father before him. He does not use the quadrant as often as you might expect. He uses it at noon to verify latitude. Everything else he reads from the ocean itself. The color of the water. In the deep open ocean, water is a blue, so pure and dark it looks like the color of something invented. As you approach shallow water, the blue lightens. Over sandbanks it turns green. Over reef it shifts toward turquoise. A navigator who knows these colors can read the depth beneath him without a sounding line, simply by looking at the surface of the water and knowing what the color means. A sounding line is a weighted rope lowered to the bottom, and it works perfectly in shallow water and tells you nothing in water too deep for the rope to reach. The color of the water tells you something about depth, even in the open ocean, and the experienced eye can read it without any instrument at all. The birds. Certain species of seabird range far out over open ocean, and their presence tells you little about nearby land. Others stay close to shore. A frigate bird seen at sea means land is within a day of sailing. A specific pattern of petrels tells you something about the current you are moving through. A man who has watched birds from the deck of a ship for 20 years has a library of observations that no instrument can replicate. The swells. The ocean never stops moving, and its motion contains information. Long, regular swells moving in a consistent direction tell you about distant weather and distant geography. A swell arriving from an unusual angle tells you that somewhere beyond the horizon, something large is pushing water, and that something is either a storm building or a landmass deflecting the current. An experienced navigator reads the way the ship moves in the swells, the way a physician reads a pulse, not looking for a specific number, but for the character of the motion, its rhythm, its depth, what it changes to overnight. The ocean is not simply where the ship sits. It is an active system that is constantly communicating with anyone patient enough to listen. You stand at the bow in the morning and watch the water ahead of you, and understand slowly, over the weeks and months of this voyage, that the ocean is not empty. It is full of language. You are simply learning the alphabet. The navigator knows it completely. He stands at the bow, sometimes in the early morning, with his eyes moving across the water in front of the ship, and his face has the expression of a man reading something interesting. He is reading the ocean. He is reading it the way it was always meant to be read, by someone patient enough to stand still and listen to what it is saying. You will never read it as well as he does, but you are beginning. And in the beginning of that reading, something happens to your sense of where you are in the world. You stop feeling lost. You start feeling located, not pinned to a specific latitude and longitude, located in a larger sense, in the current, in the migration of birds above you, in the color of the water beneath you, in the long, slow pulse of the swells coming from the south. You are somewhere in the Atlantic. You know this with certainty. Now you are starting to know what that means. Chapter 13. The people behind the flag. It is easy to sail under a flag without knowing the names of the people who made it mean something. The black flag of the Golden Age did not arrive in the world already loaded with meaning. It was filled with meaning by specific human beings who made specific choices and who had specific faces and specific histories and whose lives ended in specific and often unambiguous ways. 3 of those lives deserve to be told fully. The first is Edward Teach. The man history calls Blackbeard was not the most successful pirate of his era by the number of prizes taken. That distinction belongs to Bartholomew Roberts, who captured more vessels than anyone else in the Golden Age before his death in 1722. Blackbeard was something different. Blackbeard was the most successful psychologist of the Golden Age. He understood reputation as a weapon in a way that no one else of his era quite managed, and he built and maintained his reputation with the care and attention that another man might give to a fine ship. He was large. He had an enormous black beard which he wore braided into sections tied with colored ribbon at the ends, so that the beard itself became a visual statement. In battle, he wove slow-burning cannon fuses into his hair and let them burn so that he approached enemy vessels with smoke rising from around his face and his head. The sulfur smell preceded him across the water. The visual effect was of a man who had walked out of hell and was returning to report. This was not accidental. Teach was by most accounts of those who encountered him and survived a man who preferred surrender to bloodshed because surrender was free and bloodshed was expensive, and he understood this calculation completely. The smoke and the burning beard and the enormous fearsome presence were all instruments of the same economy. Every ship that stopped at the sight of him saved him the cost of a broadside and added one more verified story to the reputation that made the next ship stop. He was also, by several accounts, a man who could be genuinely good company in the right circumstances. Men who sailed with him described a captain who was attentive to the welfare of his crew and who maintained the articles with seriousness. The terror was real. The humanity was also real. These things coexisted in him in the way they coexist in most people who are looked at honestly enough. His end came on the night of the 21st of November, 1718. He was anchored at Ocracoke Inlet on the coast of what is now North Carolina. He had been drinking since afternoon with a trader named Odell, who had come aboard as a guest and was still there late into the night. Blackbeard was reportedly in fine spirits. He was telling stories. He was pouring rum. He was entirely unaware that two small naval sloops commanded by a Royal Navy lieutenant named Robert Maynard were anchored just out of sight beyond the inlet waiting for daylight. Maynard attacked at dawn. In the battle that followed, Teach was shot 5 times and stabbed somewhere between 15 and 20 times by different accounts. He kept fighting after each of these things happened. He kept fighting for a period that eyewitnesses described with the kind of specific astonishment that people reserve for events they believe will not be credited without emphasis. He kept fighting, and then he simply stopped. His body and the bodies of his crew were thrown overboard. His head was hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship for the journey back to port. The man was gone. The name was just beginning. The second story belongs to Bonny and Mary Read, and it cannot be told as 2 separate stories because the circumstances of their lives brought them together and kept them together and ended them together in a way that requires treating them as a single account. The articles of most pirate vessels explicitly prohibited women on board. The reasoning given was practical. Men living in close proximity for extended periods formed rivalries, and the presence of a woman was judged to be a reliable accelerant for those rivalries. The rule was standard. Bonny broke it. Bonny was living in Nassau with a husband she had married through the legal mechanisms of the colonial system and did not want. She left him. She left the husband and the respectability and the life that the colonial system offered a woman of her circumstances, and she went aboard a sloop captained by a man named John Rackham, who was known by the nickname Calico Jack for the patterned trousers he favored. She did not ask permission to go. She went. Mary Read had been presenting herself as a man for years before she encountered Rackham crew. She had served in the British Army as a soldier. She had worked as a sailor on merchant vessels. She had moved through the world in a male disguise that apparently functioned well enough to survive long-term scrutiny. When she found herself on Rackham vessel, she continued the disguise initially and was eventually known to the crew for what she was, and sailed alongside Bonny in the specific capacity of someone who would not be told no. When Rackham and his crew were captured in October 1720, the captain and most of the men were below deck. They were drunk. The attack came quickly in the night from a government vessel, and the men were incapacitated below, while above deck, 2 members of the crew stood and fought the boarding party. Bonny and Read stood on deck and fought alone. By the account of the capture, the 2 women fought with more energy and more effectiveness than any of the men who eventually emerged from below. When it was over and the crew was taken, Bonny had words for Rackham as he was led away that the historical record has preserved. She told him she was sorry to see him there, but that if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog. Both women were tried and convicted and sentenced to death in a colonial court in Jamaica in 1720. The trial produced testimony that described their conduct during capture and during the fight preceding it, and the testimony was consistent across multiple witnesses. They had fought. The men had not. Both women declared they were pregnant. The executions were delayed. Mary Read died of fever in prison before the delay ended. Bonny simply disappears from the historical record at some point after the trial. What happened to her, no one knows. She vanished from the documents as completely as if she had stepped through a door that closed behind her. The third story is Benjamin Hornigold, and it is the strangest of the 3. Hornigold was, in a real sense, the founder of the Republic of Pirates. He was operating out of Nassau before almost anyone else. He established the informal codes and customs of the place. He mentored Edward Teach before Teach became Blackbeard. He was one of the original architects of everything the Golden Age became. Hornigold had one famous refusal. He would not attack British ships. His crew eventually voted him out for this. He accepted a pardon from the British Crown in 1718, and then he became the most effective pirate hunter in the Caribbean, using his intimate knowledge of his former associates, their routes, their hiding places, the tactics they used, the captains they trusted, the ports where they sold their goods. Hornigold ran them down, one by one, with the efficiency of a man who knows exactly what he is looking for, because he helped build what he is looking for. He died in a shipwreck in 1719 chasing pirates. The republic that he built and then unmade outlasted him by less than a year. Chapter 14. The Black Flag Falls. Nothing lasts forever on the open ocean. Not the weather, not the prize, not the republic. The same logic that made the Golden Age possible eventually made it impossible, and the ending when it came was not dramatic in the way that endings in stories tend to be. It was administrative. It was a man in a clean coat arriving in a harbor with documents in one hand and warships behind him, and the offer of a choice between two futures. The man was Woodes Rogers. He arrived in Nassau harbor on the 27th of July, 1718, with 7 warships and a commission from the King of England, making him the new royal governor of the Bahamas. He carried with him 2 things. The first was a royal proclamation of general pardon for any pirate who surrendered by a specified date and swore an oath of loyalty to the crown. The second was a noose and the willingness to use it. Rogers was not a simple man. He had circumnavigated the globe. He had been a privateer himself. He understood the world he was sailing into in a way that most colonial administrators did not, and he used that understanding with precision. He knew that the Republic was held together by the specific economic logic of piracy, and that the same men who would fight to the death against an abstract threat would think carefully before fighting a concrete offer of a pardon and a legal life. He was right about most of them. The harbor that had flown the black flag for years watched Woodes Rogers sail in, and most of it did not resist. The sloops that were there either left quietly before his arrival, or their captains came ashore and signed the oath and became legal men in the space of a morning. Some of them meant it. Some of them signed and returned to sea and resumed their former occupation and were hunted down and hanged. But most of them took the pardon and kept it. 8 men refused. They were tried under Rogers' authority within weeks of his arrival. They were convicted. They were hanged on the beach at Nassau on the 9th of December 1718. Their bodies were displayed afterward in the way that colonial authority displayed the bodies of its enemies, as a message to anyone watching, as a permanent visible argument about the cost of continuing. Rogers' motto as governor was engraved on the official seal of his administration: piracy expelled, commerce restored. He meant both of these things, and he achieved both of these things. Within 2 years of his arrival, Nassau was a functioning colonial port with a fort and a garrison and a governor house, and the harbor that had held the Republic held ordinary merchant traffic instead. The transformation was not subtle, and it was not slow. But the Golden Age did not end only in Nassau. It ended in 100 other places over the same years in the same way. The Royal Navy deployed fast, well-armed vessels specifically to hunt the pirate sloops that remained at sea. The legal noose tightened from both ends simultaneously. The pardons offered the men who were tired a way out, and the warships hunted the men who were not tired, and the men in between watched carefully and made their calculations, and most of them concluded that the calculation had changed. Bartholomew Roberts died in battle in 1722 when a naval warship found him at anchor off the coast of West Africa. He was on deck in his finest clothes, as he always was when he expected a fight. He died quickly from a broadside blast, and his crew dressed his body in his best coat and threw him overboard as he had asked them to, according to the accounts of those who survived to tell it. The ship was taken. The crew was hanged. Roberts was the last great pirate captain of the Golden Age, and when he was gone, the age was effectively over. The fates of the Golden Age came in 4 varieties. Death in battle was one, a clean death by some accounts. The worst was the public gallows in a colonial port, followed by the iron gibbet. When a pirate was hanged, his body was not buried. It was put into a cage of iron, shaped to fit a human form, and the cage was hung at the harbor entrance, where every ship entering the port would see it. The cage would hang there for years, for as long as it took for the body inside it to reduce to the point where it was no longer recognizable as having been a person. This was the intended message. This was the colonial authorities writing their argument in the most direct available language. Marooning was the third fate. Exile on a deserted island with a knife and a flask of water, and sometimes a single pistol with a single charge. The pistol was not a kindness. It was the offer of a decision you could make for yourself about how the island ended for you. Some men survived marooning by being found by passing ships. Most did not survive long enough to be found. And then there was the fourth fate, which was the one that most of them chose. They walked off the edge of the Golden Age into ordinary life. They signed the pardon. They changed their names sometimes, and sometimes did not bother. They found work on merchant vessels or in colonial ports, or in the trades that port towns required. They were men in their 20s and 30s with specific skills and no particular desire to tell anyone exactly where those skills had been developed. They were just men who had once done something extraordinary and were now doing something ordinary, and the world was largely willing to accept this transaction. They became invisible. What did not become invisible was the story. A man named Captain Charles Johnson published a book in 1724 titled A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. It was the most widely read book about piracy ever written, and it created the definitive versions of nearly every major figure of the Golden Age. Some of what it contains is accurate history drawn from trial records and eyewitness accounts. Some of it is invention dressed as history. It is impossible from the current distance to always know which is which, and this ambiguity is itself part of the book quality, because the ambiguity makes the stories better, and Johnson knew this. Robert Louis Stevenson read versions of these stories. In 1883, he published Treasure Island and invented the treasure map with the X and Long John Silver, with the parrot and the moral complexity of a pirate who is more interesting than the hero. He took the single documented case of a pirate burying stolen goods and made it the defining act of all piracy. The parrots, the treasure maps, the one good leg, and the complicated relationship with right and wrong. All Stevenson, built from Johnson, built from the actual human lives lived on these waters in these years. The real pirates were men who had run out of acceptable options and chose a dangerous one. They were not romantic. They were not heroes. Most of them died young and badly and left nothing behind except a line in a court record and a name that someone wrote down once and then forgot. But the story they lived was romantic. The story was true. The democracy on the open ocean, the articles signed by candlelight over a barrel, the share that was the same for every man. The flag that meant stop or face something you will not enjoy. The republic on the beach where 1,000 men lived outside every law except the ones they wrote themselves. That story survived. That story is still going. You are in it right now. The ocean is the same ocean. The stars above it are the same stars. Somewhere in the dark on the water, the wind is moving through the rigging of a ship that does not need to exist, and yet does, because the story of people who refuse to accept the terms they were given is a story that human beings cannot seem to stop telling. Sleep well. The black flag is still flying somewhere out there in the dark.